بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Begin with the name of God, seeking His help, His blessings, and His protection. We praise Him for He's the Lord of everything in existence, and we ask Him to bless and honor and compliment the Messenger Muhammad, his family, his disciples, and those who follow his guidance to the last day. So we have another episode and session of prophetic stories, illustrations of life, where we're covering the events of the life of the messenger and trying to extract lessons from each one of them individually and trying to apply those lessons into our lives. Allahumma allimna ma yanfa'una wanfa'na bima 'allamtana wa zidna ilma. We ask you, Allah, to teach us that which benefits us, to allow us to benefit from the things that we learn, and to increase us in knowledge. Allahumma ij'al ma ta'allamnahu hujjatan lana la alayna. We ask you to make the things that we learn an evidence for us and not an evidence against us. Last week we met and we spoke about ways of not running people away from God, not scaring them away from God. But I felt that I didn't do enough justice to why certain interactions took place. Why did Mu'adh say the things that he did? Why would he, considering that he has all this knowledge, lead people in such a prolonged prayer service and so forth? So I just wanted to cover those points, and then we'll move on to today's story if we have time. So basically a few things to keep in mind. Number one, salah is one of the most important things that we can do in this religion. So we want to visualize the occasion right now, and what did Mu'adh do at this event? Leading those believers in this prescribed ritual is a great responsibility. Reciting Surah Al-Baqarah, the longest surah of the Quran, is a great blessing. Standing before God, engage in worship, is a huge honor. So these three things are positive things. So we want to look at things now from the perspective of Mu'adh. The community of the Prophet realized that leading the worshipers in prescribed worship is a huge responsibility. And the Prophet himself prayed for those who offer it in the proper way. He made special prayers that God may bless them and reward them. Also, Surah Al-Baqarah, chapter 2 of the Quran, titled The Cow, for an event that happened with the Israelites. It includes the greatest surah in the whole Quran, which is Al-Kurdy, which is passage 255. Standing before our Lord, taking extra long in communicating with Him, is an act of worship like no other. All of those things, again, are important things. So now, these three matters were combined in one of those scholarly figures of the early community. We spoke about him being beloved to the Messenger of God. He was knowledgeable about the rules and the regulations. And he was one of the few people who had memorized the whole Quran in the lifetime of the Messenger. He was brilliant, he was bright, he was smart, he was very kind, and he was basically one of the primary students of the Messenger of God. So now this helps us to realize, why did Mu'adh do this particular habit? Why was this habit of his where he would go to the messenger, spend the day there, learn from him, and then at nighttime, after he performs Isha with him, he would go back to his neighborhood, which is on the outskirts of Medina, and lead his people. Although it's very difficult to go back and forth. And we said the people who lived in that area, Banu Salima, had actually requested of the messenger, can we please move next to you so we don't have to basically waste our time in between. Now, one lesson that we can extract here is the power of the prayer that the messenger taught Mu'adh. To do this, basically, to go back and forth a long distance, to sit down and to study the whole day, to perform worship with the messenger, yet still have the responsibility to go back to your community and serve, is amazing. Now, we can say that how was Mu'adh able to do all of these things? Again, it was that special prayer that the messenger taught him. Allahumma a'inni ala dhikrika wa shukrika wa husni ibadatik. Oh God, help me to remember you, to mention you, to be conscious of you, to be grateful to you and to worship you in the best of manners. That prayer is accepted. If we say it sincerely, then our acts of worship will be easier for us to perform. This is another lesson, not necessarily from this story directly, but every single one of us, a lot of times I know, because a primary community or demographic that I deal with are new Muslims, and new Muslims have a lot of challenges incorporating Islam into their lives. Another demographic I deal with is university students, and it's very challenging to incorporate certain teachings into your lives. So the very first thing we want to tell all of these people who are struggling with prayer, with fasting, with being upright, with following the commandments, is ask God to help you. And He will help you. Ask Him sincerely the prayer that the Prophet taught his beloved student Mu'adh. So clearly now, when Mu'adh can stand up after this whole day of work, stand up in vigil for a long period of time, this teaches us that that prayer actually worked. He was able to be strong enough to lead people. For us, I'm a teacher. Let's say I'm teaching, I have a lesson, and then time for Isha comes. So the Shaykh, Allah reward him, he wants me to lead because he respects me. And he wants me to lead for whatever reason. He thinks I'm special or something, right? My beard is longer than his. We'll keep it at that. That's a fact. Other stuff that he might think of may not be accurate. But by the time I'm done, I'm tired. I don't want to stand there and do another performance. Because leading is a type of performance. You have to be mentally prepared, physically prepared. Some scholars say, and they used to lead salah in certain small masajid. When they were appointed to lead salah in the Prophet's masjid, they couldn't read the Quran anymore. Or in the Kaaba. They say Allahu Akbar, they can't read the Quran. The most recent imam that you guys had here, every single time he stands, he starts crying. He would get very emotional. Standing in the mihrab, in this niche of a masjid, has a specific power to it where not everybody can handle it. So if you can please excuse me, from now on, don't ever ask me to lead if you're around. So basically, that it's not easy. But how could it become easy? When Allah helps the person. So we have to pray to Allah and say, oh Allah, help me to do so. I mean, even if you notice, the brother earlier, he was teaching for an hour. And this is after his, right? He was teaching you guys. After he comes back from work, he hasn't rested. So although he's a better reciter of the Quran than I am, his voice is prettier than my voice. But he saw me, he's like, okay, opportunity, okay, let's have this guy. Maybe his excuse also, my beard is longer than his, but we'll put that to the side. The point is, it takes a lot out of you. It takes a lot of energy. But here we're seeing Mu'adh is leading with Surah Al-Baqarah after a whole day of teaching and learning and communicating and walking in the desert heat, under the sun, back and forth, right? So this teaches us the benefit of prayer and asking God to help us. Now, there was an event that actually changed the course of Mu'adh and how he did his things, which is this particular story that we talked about last week. And again, I'll just go through it quickly for those who did not have the chance to read it. So one of those nights, after he concluded the night ritual with the messenger of God, he goes back to his people and he leads his people because he was the most learned among them. And he starts reading Surah Al-Baqarah and he basically gets excited. Once you read Quran also, there is a specific pleasure to reading it, especially if you know what it means. And again, this is something that's going to come up right now in Ramadan. You notice there is a fight in our community. We have two categories of people. Those who understand what the Quran says and those who don't understand what the Quran says. So those who have the advantage of the Arabic language, they like the imam to read slowly and to sing it with melody. And their perspective is, I want to understand what's being said. Those who don't speak Arabic, they're like, look, man, just get it over with. Like, just finish reading. So they want to read it fast. And the point is because if you don't understand, you're not going to interact with the words. So he starts reading it. He's in tune with it. He's basically in the vibe, or in the, what do you call it when you're in the zone? He's in the zone with Surah Al-Baqarah. And then one of the commoners, we said, who basically is a hard laborer, we can call him blue collar individual. He's working with his hands. He requires a lot of work and effort. And he basically felt this is too much. And it's going to make me delay my sleep. I need to sleep as soon as I can so I can rest and start my job all over again the next day. It's going to ruin my schedule. So what he did was he excused himself without making an announcement. He performed the ritual by himself and he stepped out. Something happens. Again, usually things in the community, this is how it happens. There is people who spread rumors. There's so many lessons in this. People who spread rumors. So the imam had no clue what just happened. Why not? Because the imam does not have a camera behind his head, and he's not keeping tabs on everybody in the community who's behind him. So now somebody tells him, look, one of the guys, he left salah. You were leading, and he just bounced. So then Mu'adh felt bad about that, and there is reasons for that. Now, I know my main perspective today is to showcase that Mu'adh was not actually at fault here. There is justification for what he said and why he said it. We said he said something very offensive, right? He called that man a hypocrite. And that's the worst thing you can call a person. But was there reason for that? So what we have to realize, may Allah reward the people who show up for salah 5 times a day. In the life of the Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, every Muslim man who was healthy enough would be in the mosque 5 times a day. The only ones who did not show up 5 times a day were the hypocrites. So this is an important perspective to keep in mind. For us now, if somebody shows up to the masjid once a year, we're excited. Brother, alhamdulillah, you're alive. But that's how they used to check up on each other. And many of scholars say that praying in the masjid for those who are close to the mosque is an obligation. The general opinion of all the scholars, I mean, that's a minority opinion, we can say, that it's an obligation for able-bodied men who are close to the mosque to perform the prescribed ritual with the congregation 5 times a day. The other opinion, which is the majority opinion, says that it is highly recommended, meaning if you don't have an excuse to leave it off, you would be held accountable for leaving it off. It's not an obligation, but it's highly recommended. So it's a serious thing. So considering that, that's why Mu'adh had the reaction that he did. He wasn't simply calling people names. So I definitely don't want us to get that perspective. Mu'adh is not like a random imam in our community or a random super religious, holier than thou individual who's trying to be judgmental. Mu'adh is a scholarly figure who knows what he's talking about. Yet the Messenger did not excuse him, although he had justification for the things that he said. Something very, very important. So the congregational worship, the service that we have together, what it brings together is the community and makes them into one body. And what used to happen is those people who stayed away from the congregation, they used to cause friction and tension in the community. That's why they had bad names. And we still see it right now. You'll have a community and then you have a split off group. This is in all religious communities, by the way. You have the mother church and then somebody says, I don't like the pastor. Psh, split, make my own church. You got the imam or the masjid, we don't like the board. Okay, split and make another center, right? Now it's a free country, you can do that. But that showcases that the schism of the community is caused by people not coming together in worship. Now, that was actually common, and that had just started in the city of Medina. We didn't speak in great detail about the hypocrites. This was a demographic in Medina that was expecting leadership after a lot of the seniors of Medina were killed in the civil war that preceded the Prophet's migration. So certain individuals had a lot of optimism that we're going to be kings of the city of Yathrib. All of a sudden, the Messenger Muhammad comes, and the Muslims are a good number of the community, and the non-Muslims also, they all agree and they say, this is a neutral person, let him become the leader of the city, and then they have this thing called the Medina Constitution. The hypocrites were not very happy about that, so what they ended up doing was joining the community externally, but internally they had this disbelief in them. So what they would do is they would actually split from the masjid. Their excuses were many. One excuse is, the mosque is hosting homeless people, it stinks. Because there was a big community of refugees that were homeless. They're called Ahlul Suffa historically, which are refugees who migrated from Mecca, didn't have homes, didn't have money, and they were hosted in a mosque. So now if you're rich and you're well off and you come and see homeless people, you're like, I don't want this place. This is becoming a place for bums, right? So you go and you split and you make your own place. And they sure enough did their own place. It was called Masjidul Dirar. And Allah documents Masjidul Dirar in the Quran. chapter number 9, he says they only established that mosque to plot against the community. And then they invited the messenger. They said, we want you to come and pray with us. Come and pray with us so you can bless our location. And God tells them, لا تقم فيه أبدا. Don't you ever set foot in that place. Why not? لمسجد أسس على التقوى من أول يوم أحق أن تقوم فيه. A mosque, a house of worship that was established on God consciousness from day one is more deserving for you to stand in it. Meaning, any other intention for establishing a place of worship, if it's not solely for God, it's not pleasant. No matter how pretty it looks, no matter how rich it is, no matter what area it's in, if it wasn't established on the ground of righteousness, then it's useless. And that's why Mu'adh called that man a hypocrite. Mu'adh was not being judgmental. He actually, this is what he knows. He knows that who else would cause division within worship? No, he'd never experienced such a thing before. But now the flip side is the man's reaction. He was extremely shocked and he wanted to defend his honor and himself. Any one of us, earlier I was talking to one of my colleagues, someone has the wrong impression of me. I just heard about this. Some professor got the wrong impression of me that I am against a particular demographic in our community, in our society. Somehow they misunderstood what I said. Although I actually deal with that demographic, I am happy to serve them, I welcome them. And now that that impression is in that professor's mind, I'm concerned about that. Naturally, if someone calls you a name that you know it's not, like the Muslims. Why are Muslims stressing when people call them terrorists? It's like, man, you call me a terrorist, I can't even kill the roach in my house. I'm terrified if a mouse pops up from the gutter, right? I jump, and call 911 on the mouse. I'm like a Mickey Mouse, right? Not a terrorist. So whenever something is said about you that you feel very much against and you feel that it doesn't represent you, you want to free yourself from that claim. And that's what this young man did. He said, man, I can't believe Mu'adh would call me such a name. But he felt terrible, and that's why he goes to the messenger of God complaining to him. And he makes the excuse for himself. He says, I did it for a valid reason. So again, he justifies his action because he realizes stepping off from the congregation is not something praiseworthy. So he didn't go to the messenger of God justifying and rationalizing. He excused himself and he says, I did this, but this was my reason for doing it. Because basically it wasn't a time there. I didn't have the time and the versatility to stay longer because I have a certain schedule. Now the messenger of God became upset, and this is very unlike him. They say that he was never upset about anything related to himself and his personality. That's huge, by the way. For you not to basically have an ego, and for you not to feel offended regardless of what people say about you, because people said a lot of bad things about him. But he never fought back about anything related to his person. He would only push back when it related to God's commands being broken. When he saw something that was wrong, especially if somebody else was wronged. So when he heard what Mu'adh did, he felt so disappointed that Mu'adh prematurely spoke about that man without realizing the full story. Yes, he saw certain attributes of hypocrisy, not coming to the congregational prayer or splitting the community up. Those are certain attributes, like we see in our community. Someone lies. You're like, brother, he's a hypocrite. No, brother, he's not a hypocrite. But the hadith says the sign of a hypocrite, when he speaks, he lies. And this man, he lied. That means he's a hypocrite. It doesn't work like that. Passing judgment on someone requires due process. You're not a judge. You don't have a court. You don't have qualifications. We can say that's an attribute of hypocrisy. So Mu'adh here was what? Too quick to pass judgment. And that's what the messenger was disappointed about. Also, the messenger was disappointed that, Mu'adh, you should realize that people have different circumstances and conditions. You're a young man, but you don't have hard labor to do. Yes, your day has been long, but you're a student. In the end of the day, you're not really out in the sun watering your animal and watering your field. You're just sitting down, taking notes, memorizing. It's mostly mental exercise
than it is physical. So you can't think that everybody is on your level. Same thing with us. Some of us, we've been doing salah for years. So now we're able to stand straight and focus because we've been practicing. But we notice some people, maybe they're new in it and they want to scratch their leg. You seen those brothers or sisters? They start yawning in salah. They get tired, they want to stretch. When they're younger, it's very difficult. They want to move because by their very nature, they can't stop moving, right? Now, when you're older, you're like, can't you stop? What are you doing? We're worshiping God. We're trying to focus. They're not on that level. Don't be so quick to pass judgment. Hopefully, when they get to your level, they'll be better than you. But definitely do not run them away from the mosque. And that's why the Messenger ﷺ says, are you pushing people away? Are you testing people in their religion? And then he gave them instruction. Make sure that you recite shorter passages. And he gave them the exact chapters that he had in mind. And the point behind that, he says, because that's good for people who are older in age, those who are weak, and those who have certain needs. Mu'adh, again, did what any righteous person would do. He said, سَمِعْنَا وَأَطَعْنَا. O Messenger of God, I hear you and I obey what you have to say. Just like Adam, when Adam was reprimanded, oh Adam, why did you guys eat from the tree? He didn't justify it. He says, we made a mistake. Owned up to it, apologized, sought forgiveness. And then God tells him, do this. He didn't say, why do you want to kick me out of the garden? I want to stay here because it's very comfortable. No, he says what? سَمِعْنَا وَأَطَعْنَا. That's the attitude of the believers. We ask Allah to make us like those righteous. So the scholars now, they actually take a few things, and hopefully we can conclude this quickly. They take two main things. One has to do with the concept called suluk. Suluk is your behavior. So how do you behave? There is lessons about how do we behave. In therapy, they call it behavioral therapy. This is the prophetic behavioral therapy. How does the prophet give therapy in people's wrong behavior? Number one, and this is so important, so this is for all of us. Again, the lesson here is for people who come to the mosque, to make sure that you never run people away from the mosque. It is not your house, it's God's house. You want to take care of God's guests. If you don't want to do so, then leave them alone. Just let them be. That's very key. So the thing related to behavior is that the imam, the individual who's responsible to lead and to teach and to educate, should recognize the conditions of the people behind him. And this is why I am against someone like me who's a visitor to the community leading. Because I don't know everything. I don't know who's behind me. Some people may feel offended. They're like, who is this guy? Who does he think he is? He's going to come and lead us in salah. You're like, he's got a long beard. You're like, so what? The goat has a long beard too. On the weekend, I saw a goat, a guy goat. His beard longer than my beard. And he's got horns too, right? So it's not about the beard. You have to realize what's the people's condition. Some people may feel offended with the way I'm dressed because I'm not local. But now if a local person, so let's say the president of the board is here and he says, Ahmed, can you please lead us? People are saying, okay, this is safe. Because remember, the community has to worry. Any random person steps up, although any Muslim can lead in salah. That's correct legally. In Islamic law, any Muslim who's qualified to lead can lead. However, we're not living in normal circumstances. So just imagine somebody who's like on a wanted list. The FBI's most wanted list. He comes and he decides, this Rancho building is pretty neat. And I want to make this a center of my activities. And he comes here and all of a sudden the FBI closes the place down. Why? Because nobody checked this guy at the door. Again, don't be judgmental. We go back to, it's a fine line, right? It's a fine line. But that's why we say, just because I studied Islam does not give me the authority to come and push myself on people. I have to ask who's responsible here. So I know the brother here, mashallah, he's responsible. He knows the board. So I'll go ask him, is it okay? Or if he asks me, then I will comply. They teach people some of the etiquettes of the mosque. They say, if you go to a mosque and it's not your community, don't even turn on the light switch, even if it's dark. Just like when you go to somebody's house. Do you make yourself at home? You just go to a random person's house. You never met him before. And just go to the bedroom, open the fridge, eat what you like, call, some number and say, open tab on the house, charge the people. You don't do stuff like that. That's called being considerate. So the same thing here, just because we happen to, let's say we have some Islamic knowledge, or we are the mosque regulars. I remember a story, I think either it was here or somewhere else, but some imam came. He was new to the community, but that's my problem with new imams anyway. He was new to the community, and a brother came to him and introduced himself. He says, "Assalamu alaikum, brother, what's your name?" He's like, "My name is so-and-so." So the brother who's from the community says, "I am the Fajr imam." I lead Fajr in this community. He's like, "Well, I lead Fajr, Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib, and Isha." They had just hired him to be the imam, right? So from the onset, it was offensive. You're just introducing each other, and you say the wrong thing. Hopefully it wasn't anyone here in this crowd, but maybe some of you know the story. Anyway, so the imam, the one who's going to lead people, should know their conditions, and should not just know their conditions, should feel empathy to their condition. And people, like we said, are not on one level. Communities differ, societies differ, people's situations, even in the same town, differ. So sometimes a mosque in the urban area, like in downtown LA, where parking is difficult, they don't have a space. Basically, the cops are going to tow you if you stay too long in a particular place. And it's tight. They don't have a lot of, the bathroom area is not that functioning. The carpet is not that great. And people basically just want to perform salah and leave. That's typical in like urban areas. That's different than suburban areas where the mosque is huge. It's like an auditorium. We got a huge parking lot, right? The weather is different. You see the mountains. You don't see the smog. If you're in LA, you see smog instead of mountains, right? So every situation is different. So if an imam is in a country area, or in an urban area, or in an area where there's factories, or like sometimes in downtown what happens, the Muslims want to perform salah together, but like they're in a hospital. So they'll perform salah in a chapel. Their salah is not going to be like the salah in the masjid. So like when you want to lead people there, don't go read Surah Al-Baqarah. Because he's a doctor. What does a doctor do? They're going to call him to the ER. Guess what's going to happen? He'll be in the middle of salah. You're like, somebody's dying. What should he do? Leave salah. That's fine. And go save that person, right? But not everybody's in that situation. The plane, sometimes you perform salah on the plane. So only one airline I know has a specific place for salah in the back, Saudi Air. They have a musalla. So some people want to go, you have 300 Muslims on the plane that want to do salah. Fajr time is like 10 minutes in the air because the sun rises and you're going towards the east, and Fajr comes in and leaves before you even noticed it, right? So you got a lot of people want to wash themselves, a lot of people want to pray. Don't take too long leading the people. This is not the time to exercise your vocal cords. It's like, let me show them how pretty my voice is. They can't hear you up there anyway. 30,000 feet, sound doesn't really work. You don't have a mic. So again, considering people's situation, circumstance, and condition is something very, very important. And that's why in different masajid, the style of salah would be different. And there is nothing wrong with that as long as you're fulfilling the proper regulations. Same thing on college campuses. Again, typically a khutbah in a masjid, a Friday sermon takes about 30 minutes. And nobody's really going to complain if you keep it at 30, 25 to 30 minutes. I know some places they take longer and then people start leaving. That's not good. But on a college campus, they typically tell you, look, man, you got 10 minutes for a khutbah. 10 minutes. Why is that? That's because people have to go to class. The reason they're praying on campus is because they're trying to fulfill this religious obligation. So you're going to make it easier for them to do it and not more difficult on them to do it. So I excuse myself. Although I'm a chaplain on university campuses, I said, look, I haven't done that before. I'm not accustomed to giving 10 minutes and only have a few people in front of me. I'm used to like a mosque full of people. I need to train to be qualified to do that, right? So the brothers from there, they know I don't go there. Not because I don't like the students, but because maybe I'm not best equipped to deal with their condition. I'm used to talking to the community with all its different demographics. But when you're talking to one demographic, my examples won't even fit in a university demographic sometimes, except on a one-on-one cases or one-on-one basis. So now let's say you're in a mosque that basically everyone in your congregation is students of Islamic knowledge, like where we're at, IOK. So IOK, we have seminary students. These guys want salah to be long. If you don't take long, they're like, can you please like change this imam? We want another imam. Because they're looking forward to listening and paying attention, and they say, keep it slow because we want to understand. Not all the time, but certain times, if the audience wants that, the imam has to comply. So again, the imam has to be very, very considerate and consider the nature and the situation and the condition of the people behind him. How much energy do they have? And that's why we basically realize, because of this narration and what we just covered, when you look at the Prophet's leading salah, him, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this is the one that's teaching. We're talking about prophetic stories. There is many narrations that the scholars collected about how did the Prophet lead salah. So we just know he corrected Mu'adh here. He says, oh Mu'adh, you're driving people away. Right? That's a given. But now we have some narrations that say, sometimes in Surah Al-Maghrib, you know Surah Al-Maghrib, what we just read? He would recite Surah Al-Tur. Al-Tur. How long is Surah Al-Tur? I want to say 5 to 6 pages, maybe? 5 to 6 pages in Surah Al-Maghrib. I just read 3 lines in each rak'ah, by the way. So he would read At-Tur sometimes, but sometimes he would read قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ الْفَلَقِ قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ النَّاسِ. Some of the 2 shortest surah. That's the same man. Why is that? Because of the condition of the people. Maybe the people got together when it was late and the time was about to come out. So you want to ensure that Maghrib is done in its proper time. So again, another thing, the bigger the community, the bigger the congregation, the more special cases you're going to have. That's something very important. Again, if you know everyone, you're like, man, that's the normal crowd. But maybe a few weeks ago, I don't know if you guys remember, but there was a group that came, and I think they were from out of town. So clearly now you have guests here. So they're either going to do something that you're not accustomed to, or you're going to do something they're not accustomed to. So you have to meet halfway. Now the messenger, because of his mercy and his compassion, sometimes he wouldn't recognize who's all there, because of course they didn't have lights, by the way. So it was dark. At Fajr and at Isha, the mosque was dark. How would he tell the condition of people behind him? If he hears something that is wrong. So women used to come and they used to feel welcome to come, and they would bring their children. And the children would cry sometimes, because that's what children do. I don't know if you've noticed, but children, it seems like that's their favorite activity, especially in the first 2 years of their lives. They just love screaming. I think they like to hear their voice. And because they don't have a mic, they project their voice louder. So if he hears a child crying, although it's behind him, he realizes that this is going to cause the mother distress. What is the mother going to feel? She's going to feel guilty. She's like, man, I'm ruining everyone's salah. Okay. 2, she can't focus on her own worship. 3, everyone in the mosque is saying, who is this woman? Who is this lady? Right after this, we're going to write a petition, drive her away from the mosque, right? All these things are happening. So what does the Prophet do? To neutralize this whole situation, he cuts his salah short without compromising any of the requirements, right? So he doesn't need to recite a longer surah. When the Prophet says, "Oh Mu'adh, you're driving people away," this teaches us a huge lesson. This is what the scholars say. نهي عن كل ما ينفر عن الدين ويصد عن سبيله أو يوقع الناس في الفتنة سواء أكان بالقول أو بالفعل. This is a clear prohibition from the Prophet about every single matter that drives people away from the religion or makes people have trouble and confusion and makes people be repulsed by religiosity, whether it's through your statements or through your actions. That's one of the things, by the way, the messenger told us about. Sometimes it's our action, we don't even realize it. He says, if one of you ate raw onions or raw garlic, do not come to the congregation. Is coming to the congregation important or not? Very important. But when you're going to come, your foul smell, your foul mouth odor is going to bother people. And people are going to start saying, these people stink. We don't want to come here anymore. You don't have more priority than other people. So the messenger says, don't do that, because whatever harms the children of Adam, meaning of foul scent, also harms the angels. So even if there is no one here, you're like, look, man, I'm the only one that comes. Don't come. That's the Prophet's teaching, because you're going to harm the angels that are in this place. So anything that drives people away or pushes people away, we should stay away from it. Especially, so this is now when things are going to get a bit, I say I ruffle people's feathers sometimes. People who just started practicing. So this is usually our younger demographic. They want to practice Islam. Or people who have embraced the faith. Those two demographics are new. They're excited. They're going to make a lot of mistakes. Many of us inadvertently push them away by the things that we do. Whether it's our cultural insensitivities, whether it's religious zealousness, whether it's inconsideration. Like, let's say a brand new Muslim comes in and you want to try to get into their private lives and ask them questions that only the FBI would ask. It's like, I'm trying to come and worship God, man. What are you trying to do? We don't realize that we're pushing people away by some of our behavior. So don't push people away is something extremely key. The last lesson here is a legal lesson, and hopefully this will make sense. Which is, some scholars actually utilize this story, part of it, to say that it is allowed for the imam and the ones that are behind him not to have the same exact intention in the act of worship they're engaged in. Not to have the same exact intention. So let me break it down. Mu'adh prays behind the Messenger of God. His intention is to perform Salatul Isha, the night worship. And he's done with it. You only perform one obligation per day. You can't do multiple Isha. So now he did Isha with the Messenger, it's done. Now he goes to his people. His people have not performed Isha yet. Their intention is, we're about to perform the obligatory Isha. What is the intention of Mu'adh? I'm doing a voluntary act of worship. You said sunnah or nafila, which is extra and voluntary. So some scholars took from this that it is allowed in some circumstances to do that. Not all the scholars have this opinion, however. So that's why you have to be careful. Don't just tell people somebody's performing, let's say, this happens in Ramadan a lot. So the imam will be doing taraweeh, and maybe you got delayed because of breaking your fast. You come in and you want to do your Isha. So the imam is doing 2 rak'ahs at a time. So you go and you start joining with him, and then when he's done with his 2, you get up and you finish your 2 to complete your Isha. And other people will do what? They will do their separate Isha on the side. So again, this is an issue that's contentious amongst the jurists. But it's good to understand that our community has these diverse opinions that they follow. What's best? A lot of scholars say that this may have been a specific situation for Mu'adh, in a circumstance where the people did not have anyone else to lead them. So there's ways of looking at it. And they say, you must ensure that the imam and those behind him have the same exact intention. This way you're not basically having confusion in your devotion. So again, but realize that some people do follow the other opinion, so cut them some slack. Another thing that the scholars have benefited from this story, they said, if someone who's behind the imam, something happens in their salah, they say it becomes difficult for him to continue. So under what? Certain circumstances, whether he becomes extremely exhausted. And that happens to a lot of people, especially when you're sick. I remember one time I had, some type of flu symptoms. I was really sick. I went, and this was, in Medina, so we usually perform salah in the masjid, and I'm in the university because I lived in the dorms, and I'm standing, and I couldn't keep myself straight, and I'm doing this. And I'm getting dizzy, and my stomach is really upset, and I feel nauseous, right? And I just fell on the ground. I'm like, okay, I'm not going to continue this thing. I'm just going to fall down right now and wait until I feel better to get up. So that's an excuse. That's a valid excuse. You don't have to feel guilty. Oh my God, I broke my worship and God will never forgive me. This young man broke his salah, completed it by himself, and it was completely fine. Another thing is, let's say you're super sleepy. If you're super sleepy, you're not supposed to engage in worship. The Prophet says if you're super sleepy, don't engage in worship because you may want to pray for yourself. Instead, you curse yourself. So instead of saying, oh God, help me, you say, oh God, destroy me. When you get sleepy, what happens? Try having a conversation with someone who's about to knock out. I don't usually do that. I'm usually on the one who's knocking out. But my wife tells me, she's like, you just started saying some weird things. Right? I said, I'm not accountable for what I say when my mind is not with me. Let's say you're in the middle of salah and something scary happens to you. You have an excuse to come off of salah. You perform it later. But let's say there's something like a disaster about to happen. Or like you happen to be outdoors, you're in the country, and like a coyote wants to come and play with you or something. You better run away. He's not trying to play with you, right? So you better run away. But the point here is make sure that when you're able to, perform your salah. So all these things are reasons for us to realize that it's not rigid. Islamic regulations are not rigid. There is a lot of flexibility within the law. Again, what's important is don't try to find flexibility outside of the law. The law itself has plenty of flexibility. Just find out what it says though. And make sure that if you don't know, you're not an expert, don't give people religious rulings. This happens all the time. Somebody comes to you and you don't know and they're like, look man, I really had to use the bathroom, but I was in the middle of salah and the imam was taking too long. What should I do? And someone who's ignorant will tell you, just fight it off. Just hold it. What do you mean hold it? If you hold it, medically it's not good for you. Sometimes if you hold it, some people cannot hold it, and what happens? They'll leak. And what happens? That's not funny, because what's going to happen? They're going to contaminate the whole floor. And this person decided to give a ruling without having knowledge. If you don't know, say, I don't know. Let's ask someone who does. Please do not self-medicate with religious rules and say, yeah, I think that makes sense. It makes sense for you not to do that. And then somebody on the other occasion, on the other hand, will start giving their own, their own opinions as well. You're like, well, I was outdoors and I was afraid of performing salah, so I decided to do salah in my car, sitting down. No scholar allows for that. Even if you're afraid, you can delay your salah, but go somewhere where you feel safe and stand up and do salah. If you're physically able to stand, you have no excuse to sit. But a lot of people will say what? Well, I was in the middle of traffic, so I decided, pull off. When you need gas, do you pull off, or you say, no, I'm in the middle of traffic, I don't need gas? What do? You exit, you get your gas. Same thing, if it's time for salah, salah is important, exit, get off in a rest area, in a place where you feel safe, and perform salah properly. But again, many people, and I've heard this, some people are like, why do you need religious regulations? I can just read the Quran on my own and just figure things out. Well, that's not how it works. Why do you go to experts in any field? Because you're not an expert. So, and we're not asked to all be experts, but we should definitely ask the experts if we don't know. So those were some of the lessons that I wanted to add to last week's lecture. And again, my intention first and foremost is to ensure that we don't have negative thoughts about these great personalities of the past. We honor them, we respect them, and we give them excuses for things that they did, but at the same time we realize where they made mistakes. But again, here what we see is that the mistake was actually warranted. Like, he didn't know any better. He thought, man, only someone who's trying to cause problems in the community would do such a thing. So he called them that name. He didn't speak ill about his family. He didn't speak ill about his integrity. He just said one word, and the Prophet was still not very happy about that, sallallahu alaihi wa alihi wasallam. So I think that's basically what I have for this particular story. I actually came across another explanation. So maybe if you can just give me a few seconds, because I don't think we have time to enter into or to start another story. That's why. So these are some of the lessons we have here. Yes, one of the lessons they say, and again, I think we kind of touched at that the people in that community were not some spiritual superheroes. They had real lives. So this man had a job, just like everyone in life. So we're not like other religions, by the way. Yesterday I was watching a documentary, and there is a community, in Judaism, they're called Haredi Orthodox Jews, where all the men don't work. All they do is study the Torah day and night for a lifetime. So they dedicate themselves to that. We don't have that in Islam. Even the people who are specialized in Islamic knowledge, they have to do something in life. You can't just live off of other people. So the early community was like this. They used to work and they used to spend on themselves, basically. They didn't used to beg others for help. Another lesson, again, that they say, the individual who leaves off the congregational prayer, specifically for men, by the way, sisters are not obligated to come to the congregation. And that's one of the easy things, easy regulations on sisters, on the women, is that they're not obligated to come here. So if a sister doesn't show up, nobody's going to say, oh, something's wrong with this sister. Although we're supposed to check up on each other, but no one is going to accuse her spiritually and say she's missing out on active worship because she's not required to come. If she wants to, she's doing extra credit. But men are actually required to come to the congregation. That's huge. And again, many of us may not be familiar with that, but in the time of the Prophet, they said the only people that did not show up to the congregation 5 times a day were the hypocrites. That's actually scary. We have some quotes. Ibn Mas'ud, one of the earlier Muslims, he says, وَلَقَدْ رَأَيْتُنَا وَمَا يَتَخَلَّفُ عَنْهَا إِلَّا مُنَافِقٌ مَعْلُومٌ النِّفَاقِ. He says, in our time, back in my day, he says, the only people who would not show up to the 5 daily salawats in congregation were open hypocrites that no one had a doubt about their hypocrisy. And then he says, وَلَقَدْ كَانَ الرَّجُلُ يُؤْتَى بِهِ يُهَادَى بَيْنَ الرَّجُلَيْنِ حَتَّى يُقَامَ فِي الصَّفِّ. They say even someone who has a health condition, 2 men would actually carry him on their shoulder and bring him all the way to the mosque so they can stand him up in the line. And he would not stay away from the congregation. Now, mind you, this doesn't mean everybody there was like all lovey-dovey and they were all kumbaya and they got along with each other. They had personality differences. But the point was, you still come to congregation together. You don't have to love everyone that's here. Because remember, when you come here, who are you coming for, by the way? We don't come for the person next to us. We're coming first for the sake of God. This is God's house. Whether people are here or not, we're still going to show up to it. We have another narration that says, كنا إذا فقدنا الإنسان في صلاة العشاء الآخرة والصبح أسأنا به الظن. This is scary. It says when we would miss someone in the final congregation at nighttime and the first one of the day at Fajr, the break of dawn, we would have negative thoughts about that individual. Meaning it's almost like you're inviting people to think ill of you. Another thing we get to learn from this story is that when you are complaining about someone to one in authority, like the Prophet here was a person of authority, the man didn't come to him and say, you know, there was a brother who said this about me. He called him out by his name. He says, Mu'adh did this. And I struggle with Muslims. I don't know, because Muslims, sometimes, you know, we're easy when we gossip. We can gossip a lot. But sometimes when you're required to mention a person's name, they don't mention the name. So I'll come to you and I'm like, you know, there's this brother who did this. And I'm like, can you tell me who the brother is so I can make sense of the problem? Maybe the brother has a problem in his life. If you tell me this brother said this, I'll tell you, look, this guy's depressed right now. Whatever he says is due to his depression. Cut him some slack. But you're like, hypothetically speaking, sister so-and-so did this. It's like, tell me who she is, please. You're not backbiting her right now. If you're going to make an official complaint, there is nothing wrong with mentioning the person's name. It's very important from this story that we don't take narrations, hadith, and Quran and run with it without knowing the background to the story. Knowing the context is extremely important. If we don't, we're going to misinterpret it. So a lot of times, again, people just know this story and they just know, أَفَتَّانٌ أَنْتَ يَا مُعَاذ. Mu'adh, why are you causing people to be driven away from the mosque? But they don't know anything about Mu'adh. Who is this Mu'adh? Is this like some random Joe Schmo? Scholar, close to the Prophet, very versed about Islam, knows what he's talking about, had a valid reason to question that individual's actions, but the Prophet was still upset with him. Right? Something extremely important. It says, العلم بالسبب يورث العلم بالمسبب. Knowing the background allows you to understand how you're going to apply it whenever a situation arises that's similar to it. Why should Salatul Isha, the last daily salah, be short or be compact and not be too long. Again, by the way, this depends on the community. The imam, maybe some of the brothers will tell him, look man, we haven't been to the mosque all day long. Isha, please, we want you to take your sweet time. Doesn't that happen sometimes? They say, don't make it short. I want to hear Quran. I'm coming now. I've rested and I want to read, long. So it depends on the community. That's why we say, وَأَمْرُهُمْ شُورَى بَيْنَهُمْ. We consult with one another. So the imam asks the people, guys, how are you feeling? Right? I'm sure there was some type of consultation when they moved the time from 8:45 to 9 o'clock. Some people said, look, just delay it to 9. It's more people would show up. So we should consult with each other. We should talk to each other about it. And in Fajr time, the Prophet would not necessarily keep it short. He would typically keep it long, and that's another narration. The Prophet ﷺ, although he reprimanded Mu'adh, he wasn't as upset with him as he was in other situations where the offense was even a bigger offense. Anyway, so those are some of the lessons. We ask Allah to guide us to apply the lessons that we learn and to guide us not to push people away from the house of God and to allow us to be means of bringing people in, welcoming them, honoring them, respecting them, showing them empathy, realizing the conditions of other people and working with them on their level. That's the prophetic way, and that's what we're trying to learn from this particular narration. رَبَّنَا آتِنَا فِي الدُّنْيَا حَسَنَةً وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ حَسَنَةً وَقِنَا عَذَابَ النَّارِ. We ask you, O Allah, to give us the best of this life and the best of the next life and to protect us from the fire. We pray the prayer that the Messenger prayed and taught Mu'adh to pray. Allahumma a'inna ala dhikrika wa shukrika wa husni ibadatik. Oh Allah, you know that we're struggling to implement your rules and your regulations in our lives. We have a lot of challenges and a lot of obstacles. Help us to remember you and to be grateful to you and to worship you in the best of ways. To remember you and to mention you. To be grateful to you through words and actions and to worship you according to your terms, according to your rules and your regulations. رَبَّنَا ظَلَمْنَا أَنفُسَنَا وَإِن لَمْ تَغْفِرْ لَنَا وَتَرْحَمْنَا لَنَكُونَنَّ مِنَ الْخَاسِرِينَ. Our Lord and Master, we've wronged ourselves. We confess our sins to you and to no one else. If you don't forgive us and have mercy on us, we'll be amongst the losers. رَبَّنَا اغْفِرْ لَنَا وَلِإِخْوَانِنَا الَّذِينَ سَبَقُونَ بِالْإِيمَانِ وَلَا تَجْعَلْ فِي قُلُوبِنَا غِلًّا لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. Our Lord and Master, forgive us and forgive the believers who have passed before us on faith, and don't allow enmity and hate to have any place in our hearts for those who believe. And this was actually the key here, because I really felt that I may have done an injustice to Mu'adh. May Allah be pleased with him. I don't want any of us to come out with a negative perception of him. May Allah be pleased with him. Allah says in the Quran about that early generation, رَضِيَ اللَّهُ عَنْهُمْ وَرَضُوا عَنْهُ, and He uses the past tense. He says God has already been pleased with them and they are pleased with God. So this is not something that's going to happen in the future. It's already taken care of. So we ask Allah to reward those people that allowed us to learn these lessons all the way in our time and in our places. We ask Allah to help us to implement the teachings of the Prophet, and we ask Allah to shower us with His mercy, allow us to make our communities welcoming, empathetic, safe for everyone, whether we agree with them or we don't, and to guide us to have consultation amongst each other and to have our leaders represent us and serve us, and for us to complement them and to make them better and stronger. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. All praise is due to Allah, the Lord of everything in existence. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala ali Muhammad kama sallaita ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim innaka Hamidun Majid. Allahumma barik ala Muhammadin wa ala ali Muhammad kama barakta ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim innaka Hamidun Majid. As we conclude, we ask you, Allah, to bless the Messenger Muhammad, to honor and compliment and shower him with protection and grace, along with his family and his righteous followers, as you did with Ibrahim, his family and righteous followers in the past. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. God Almighty is far above any imperfection. He's perfect. He's the epitome of perfection. We praise Him. We seek His forgiveness. We repent to Him, and we test